China's much anticipated nationwide carbon trading market is set to open its door at the end of this month. It means that the state will set carbon emission quotas so that highly polluting industries, such as thermal power plants, must purchase carbon emission quotas on the market when they go beyond their allotment. It seemed to accelerate the transition to green technologies. So what new investment opportunities will this bring to the private sector? How will it benefit China's overall goal of hitting peak emissions by 2030 and achieving carbon neutrality by 2060? Let's turn to our panelists. For the latest on the carbon trading market in China, Catherine Kong joining us from Beijing, CEO of Timing Carbon. In Beijing, Qi Ye, Professor of Public Policy from Tsinghua University and Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. In Durham, Jackson Irving, Senior Fellow at the Nicholas Institute of Environmental Policy Solutions and Adjunct Associate Professor at the Sanford School of Public Policy from Duke University. Last but not least, in New York, Anthony Chen, former JP Morgan Chase chief economist. What a pleasure to have all of you. I want to start by asking Professor Qi Ye, you've been working on the issue of carbon trading market in China for years. Where are we now? Before the end of June, they say it's likely to happen.
I think it will happen within a week. We'll see the first trading. But this thing is going to be a very big step because it's going to cover 4 billion tons of carbon dioxide. When it is online, we're going to see the world's largest carbon market. But in order to make this thing work, there are a lot more work to do. I think we need to be patient and give it time and to finally see how this system works.
I see. What kind of work to do?
Well, the EU ETS started in 2005. It's been more than 15 years, and the Chinese market will likely take years to actually see the effect.
Mm-hmm.
I think building the basic infrastructure, making sure that data is accurate and precise,
True.
and also all the mechanisms for verification, reporting, data measurement. All this fundamental work really need to be not only in place but also in good quality.
I see. Ms. Kong, you are doing it on a daily basis. After all, your company is trying to coordinate companies to trade carbon. Data-wise, do we have accurate ones?
You mean daily data of the emission or about trading? No, we don't have. It's verified yearly, so we know this data once a year.
I see. Then it is hard for you, right? I mean, to do your job in a way, because you have to do it every day, and it is a varying factor.
Yes, you can see that.
For companies like yours on the front line, what do you consider is the most important at the very beginning stage to get the market right?
I think the right thing, firstly, keep the data correct. This is a fundamental thing. And also, I hope they could accept financial institution and investment entity to join this market as soon as possible. Then they could this market can work with enough liquidity and capital.
Mr. Chen, of course, when it comes to the financial institutions and also investment banks, it comes to your home turf. Tell me more about whether that is the most crucial step for now in China.
I think that right now, given the way the world is moving, that climate change is more important. It is an important step, but we should not ignore the fact that there are some sort of conflicts between keeping the environment clean over the near term and, of course, the challenges to economic growth, which means that when economic growth is slowing down, there's going to always be a temptation to ease on some of the climate change requirements of a program like this.
Mr. Irwin, your take?
I think that one of the core characteristics of the Chinese system attempts to respond to precisely what Mr. Chan has just outlined, and that is that it is based on efficiency targets, which regulate the amount of emissions that a company can release relative to its overall production. This means that as companies produce more of a product, in the case of the power sector, electricity, they gain more allowances to emit alongside that. The goal of the system is to make that more efficient and to have them emit less per their output. The big question will be whether they ultimately pursue a hard cap on these emissions, similar to what we see in most other ETSs in the world, including in Europe.
I see. So you're coming from different areas. Let's focus on some of the most important things first. Professor Qi, data. What about the collection of data? And how should the data be updated? And how will businesses use the data? Who will monitor the data? This is the most important thing that I see it from the very beginning of this carbon trade.
Well, right now, the system is relying primarily on the reporting from the businesses, and now we're talking about more than 2,000 of them, the power companies, and also the quota decided. For each of these companies are also based on their self-reporting. Of course, there are going to be verification by a third party, and there are going to be approval by the government agencies. But initially, this is a huge amount of work for the government and for the third party as well.
I see.
So right now, I mean, the only way that we are starting this system is based on the self-reporting. I just also want to mention one point that Professor Yun just talking about. Right now, the focus is indeed on the efficiency, but ultimately, I think even by design, this system will be moving toward EU ETS-like system. Have a hard cap, because without a hard cap, we're not going to have a really a meaningful system.
Mr. Irwin, what about that data? To the Europeans who have started earlier, how the data are being collected? And what about that in North America and elsewhere in the world? Are they catching up with the latest also?
Sure. Well, China has made enormous strides in managing data collection, monitoring, and reporting and verifying that data through a series of pilot exercises in some of the largest provincial and municipal economies in the country. So that experience has brought with it a lot of learning that the Ministry of Ecology and Environment has been able to incorporate into data collection and verification for the national system. As Ms. Catherine mentioned earlier, much of the onus for this data collection comes on the covered entities, the companies themselves, who have to report it out. But there are various channels that ensure that that data is reliable and is collected effectively in a registry.
What kind of channels you're talking about?
Well, there are different verification agencies, both government and third party, that can ensure that the stated emissions are true. There are auditing systems in place. There are penalty systems in place as well for exceeding one's compliance obligations. So there are checks that try to ensure that data is there. There's the development of an early warning system that's currently underway, which will seek to find outliers in the data as it's reported. Sometimes those come not from any nefarious activity, but from just errors of decimal points and reporting. So there is a kind of a large set of efforts, all of which is steered towards making sure that all participants in the market can trust the data that they see.
Professor Qi, we understand that there are third-party entities, such as Mr. Owen just mentioned, that are trying to make sure the data are correct. But how frequent should the data be updated? And what does that mean, the current situation?
Well, since the trading and the compliance is on yearly basis, so right now the requirements is really not that high. I think right now the focus is to make this system operational before we make it effective.
Right.
So this is therefore the data accuracy and precision is a very important issue, but really not that urgent. So now we don't really. I mean, the requirement for high frequency data is not that high right now.
Ms. Kong, as a business who is trying to do carbon trading, what do you think are some of the necessities? Could you list some of those for us, the priorities, make it work?
I think this important, crucial thing is include data and also, as Mr. Qi said, there's not much frequency in the market. So I definitely think there should be more financial institution and investment entity to join this market, and also the regulation.
Tell me more about the regulations.
I mean, trading regulation is like it should be regulated by these SOE, these entities, not just the MOE. MOE is Ministry of the Environment.
Could you tell me more about why would businesses regulate?
Because it's a financial market sooner or later. So at the first, it's a spot market, it's a commodity market, but all these things should be regulated by financial supervisor.
Mr. Chen.
Yes, I think that all these comments, Professor Ewing and Professor Yi mentioned that the data, of course, is still not adequate. And the penalties in place that Professor Ewing talked about are crucial for that reason, because we have to make sure that if the ability of these regulators to monitor these companies is not perfect, that these companies have sufficient penalty systems in place, that they have a strong incentive to do the right thing. Without that, I think we would not make as much progress. But I am very confident that the system will have those in place, and slowly the Chinese system will start to approach the type of efficiency that we see in Europe. But again, Europe started in 2005, as Professor Yi mentioned. You cannot expect the Chinese system to be exactly at the same stage as we see in Europe.
Professor Qi, tell me more about the regulation part.
Regulation right now, because let's just talk about the nature of the Chinese carbon market. It's a little bit different than the EU system and also the system in the North America and other places. The focus of the Chinese carbon market is really hoping eventually to reduce carbon emissions, and therefore the nature of the carbon reduction is so much more than the feature for as a finance system, and that's why we do not really see any design of the derivatives in this market. And right now, this market right now, and for quite a long time, I would assume we're not going to see very much of the features, of the market as a financial. As a financial system that we
see. It's still years to come, I guess, in that regard. But tell me more about the cap thing, because you and Mr. Irwin have been keep on talking about it. We understand now it's about the efficiency, because in China there are various provinces, and these provinces are having very different ways of developing their economy. Some have to rely the power supply mainly based on coal. Of course, that's a very sensitive subject when it comes to carbon trading, but that's how things are. So Professor Qi, based on reality and the sustainability of the market for years to come, the Chinese way of doing it is to have make sure the efficiency is being considered rather than a hard cap. So, Professor Chi, tell me more about this system and how do you see this is likely to move to the next stage?
Well, in a way, the current system, the system we're about to see in a week, has evolved from the system, the pilot systems, the 7 pilot system that was started 10 years ago.
Yes.
10 years ago, over the last decade, China does not really have a hard cap overall for national target for a cap. And therefore, in the past decade, there was no reason to actually make a system with a hard cap. But right now, the situation is totally different, right? Last year, when President Xi made the announcement to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060, basically now the country has a target, right? Overall, we have 10 billion tons of carbon dioxide. We need to reduce the 10 billion tons to essentially zero, right? By 2060. That means over the course of the coming 40 years, and we really have a hard cap. But the system need to catch up. The design of the system, which has evolved in a way from the previous system, now need to catch up. And then we need to, we're about to see a hard cap.
But Mr. Xi, I talked about the realities in China. Of course, there are realities anywhere in the world, but China's, for example, Shanxi province is a province that's based on, coal consumption. And the power supplies in China, a lot of them are coal power plant. So it is very hard to eliminate them all at once. And the country's power supply comes from many of it. So Professor Chi, given the reality rather than idealism, how do you see the current system? And how long do you see this is likely to be a process to phase out the current one, which is mainly focused on efficiency, then to focus on a hard cap possibility?
The hard reality is 97% of all the resource endowment is, for energy is coming from coal. And in terms of the system, 20 years ago, the system really relied, 4/4 of energy comes from coal. But coal essentially has already peaked at the year 2013, where we have 4.2 billion tons of coal produced and consumed that year. And over the last 8 years, we have seen the coal in the last 8 years never exceeded that number in the last 8 years. Now, why did that happen? Because over the last 8 years, we have seen the very rapid growth of clean energy, wind and solar, the hydro, nuclear, all this energy has been increasing to substitute the coal that would have been used for coal-fired power plant. But that is not happening, right? So this year, 2021, we probably will see a little bit of increase of coal, but maybe a little bit even more than the year in 2013. But that's not a major problem. The overall trend is the coal is going to be phased out, I think, quite rapidly. I'm very optimistic about that. Look at the power generation, right? Right now, we're seeing 15 Chinese cents per kilowatt hour of we're talking about the price.
Mr. Irwin, you want to have your take on this?
Certainly, I agree with Professor Chi's assessment. The ETS in the overall Chinese efforts to first peak emissions before 2030 and then ultimately reach carbon neutrality by 2060. We do need to compare it to the other policies that are being pursued alongside it. And in the near term, I predict that policies that are regulating particulate matter pollution, for example, that are giving hard caps to overall coal consumption and energy production, that have different regulations under the 14th Five-Year Plan, for example, will put harder restrictions on many companies than they will face with the ETS.
Right.
That is what is likely to shift over time as the ETS evolves, not only to include a hard cap, but also to integrate major industrial sectors from the country. If it's able to do both of those things effectively, it will then become a primary, if not the primary instrument driving decarbonization in the country, and will give price signals that facilitate a sort of transition that towards more renewables coming online, towards the decarbonization of industry and the like.
I see. Professor Qi, before we go, there has always been an important link between how local governments are being assessed in terms of their performance and how systems like environmental protection and also carbon trading is likely to be implemented. Do you see much connection now of the systems, and how is it likely to work under the China circumstances?
That's a very critical issue. Over the last 40 years, we have seen the local government have been measured, their performance has been evaluated based on their performance on economic growth. And in the next 40 years, and this will be the new measure. The new measure will be, the local government will be measured by how they perform in achieving the target of carbon neutrality. I think that performance is not there yet, but the President Xi, already made the comments. He's asking every level of the local government to actually shoulder the responsibility to take this very seriously, creating a roadmap, an action plan, and implementation plan, a timetable. So we're now seeing that the local government are really taking this as a political responsibility issue. That's something we're seeing right now. And I think the next 40 years, that's something we're going to see again and again.
I want to thank the four of you joining us, updating us on the latest leading up to China's first national carbon trading market. Qi Ye, Jackson Irwin, Catherine Kong, and Anthony Chen. Thank you so much for joining us. And you're watching World Insight. Coming up, China's State Council Information Office issues a white paper in the run-up to the 100th anniversary of the CPC. How has the CPC led China to become a world-class economy? Welcome back. This is World Insight. China has just released a white paper on its political party system, underlying the Communist Party's cooperation with other political parties. The document says the system of multiple party cooperation and political consultation under the Communist Party of China's leadership is a basic element of China's political framework. It describes the model as indigenous to China, but also receptive to other countries' political achievements. According to the white paper, the political party system is key to modernizing China's governance system and capacity, and it's demonstrated the strength and vitality in China's political and social life. For the white paper on China's political party system in Beijing, Victor Gao Zhikai, Vice President of CCG Current Affairs Commentator, and also in Berlin, Dr. Wolfram Adolfi from Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. He's a sinologist and has done research on Chinese politics and CPC for almost 40 years. Gentlemen, what a pleasure to see you. I want to go to you first, Dr. Gao, since you're sitting here in the Beijing studio with me. Tell me more about, at this moment, 100 years of China's Chinese Communist Party, this white paper, what is trying to say about the nature of this political party and its system?
Well, first of all, the Communist Party of China, with its membership up to about 100 million people, is the biggest, largest, most important political party ever in human history. It has been the ruling party in China ever since 1949, and it has not only liberated the Chinese people, but also transformed China into the second largest economy in the world. And by now, China is the biggest manufacturing nation, largest trading nation, with the biggest consumption market in the world. We are really moving in the right direction, and the Chinese people have seen their living standards improving. We have eliminated abject poverty, and I think we are very much enjoying the way of life we have, and we believe that China is moving in the right direction. Nothing
So
can
you are
stop
saying
China's.
that Chinese political party system, in fact, has left a good track record about what has been achieved. Is that what you're trying to say?
Absolutely. I
Okay,
think the
got it.
system for China now is what we call socialism with Chinese characteristics. This is unparalleled and very unique in human history, and you cannot find anything similar to the Chinese way of development anywhere else in the world.
Dr. Adolfi, in China, the government and the party are two concepts. How do you see these two concepts and in China, this political party system?
Yeah, I see it as a very, very unique new way. It is not so unique that there is no parallel in the history and in the world. You know, I come from German Democratic Republic, and we had a we tried to do it in a almost similar way, to combine the leadership of the party with the government and to make a common program. And what we now see in China is that the Communist Party took its own experience as well as the experience of communist parties all over the world to develop a new way of socialism with Chinese characteristics. And that is what I see with great interest. But because indeed it happens in a time when we have a lot of global challenges,
Right.
climate challenges, the challenges of the new industries, of digitalization, and of all these technological new developments. And at the same time, my point is that I am very, very interested in seeing this indeed new way of a successful combining of the role of the party and the government to take on the new global challenges and the national challenges.
Right. That's one uniqueness of China's political system. Another interesting thing is how the political parties in China work. Mr. Gao, as you've been with us for years as a current affairs commentator and witnessing, every year the political season in China, particularly the CPPCC, mainly it is about the Chinese Communist Party together with other democratic parties in China in consultation with one another. Now, how do you see that the Chinese Communist Party has been always taking the lead in China since 1949, and all the other political parties and democratic parties are mainly provide their consultations and advice to the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, ever since 1949, the Communist Party of China has been the ruling party. And there have also been 8 what we call democratic parties, which have existed for all these decades. And they actually support the Communist Party as the ruling party in government, in advising the government and the party, etc. Now, the Chinese democracy has its own logic. It doesn't mean that the Communist Party dictates every terms for the whole society or for all the other democratic parties. It actually involves what we call consultation. That means for any major decision to be adopted into a policy or action plan, they need to be vetted, they need to be consulted, and different political parties have a chance to give their opinion and also suggestions. Sometimes they also criticize some of the proposals. So eventually, the decisions to be made are mostly the result of a collective process of consultation. This is truly a Chinese way of democracy because we emphasize moving in the same direction rather than, for example, one vehicle having 4 different wheels, but each wheel moves in its own direction. We thought that is not only chaotic, that's also paralyzing, and for China with such a big population, such daunting tasks, we need to have a roadmap good for everyone in the country moving in the same direction.
Dr. Adolfi, you've been doing research about political parties. There's one thing that really needs to be said clear in a way. That is, how would you assess the success of a political party? Do you look at the track record? Do you look at the principles? Do you look at its own party constitutions in a way? How to judge a political party? Do you look at whether it delivers or how much it delivers for whom? So these are very interesting questions. Dr. Adolfi, tell me more about your thoughts.
Yeah, indeed, we always come back to this question that there is a really new way in China. I agree. There are different forms of democracy. There are different understandings of democratic action in the society. And for me, it is important that the different types of democracy now all have the same task to handle the big new challenges of global development. And we see that the Western type of democracy it is not successful enough to be to work in the whole world and to overcome the big difficulties of the world. And now there is this socialism of Chinese characteristics that shows that there can be another relation between the different parties and between the leadership of the Communist Party and the other parties, and to come into a general social understanding what's the best for the people. And but for me, of course, looking at it from Germany, there is not only the question what is the best for the Chinese people, but at the same time I'm interested in which global influence comes from this development, because we have these global problems and we look with great interest what comes out internationally from this obviously successful development of the Chinese democratic system.
We are seeing so many changes all at the same time, Dr. Gao. You earlier illustrated to us some of it, both the geopolitics and the technologies, and also the ways how different powers exert their influence in the world. Now, Dr. Gao, how do you see, 100 years of Chinese Communist Party coincides with this dramatic change of the world?
I think the world back in 1921 is unrecognizable from today's perspective. And I would say what we are thinking is for the coming 100 years, the world may change again. And China is changing. So we are talking about changes unheard of for at least 100 years. So this is revolutionary change in China, in the world history, in China's relations with the rest of the world, and China's relations with other major countries in the world. Now, we embrace such changes. I think ever since 1978, China's philosophy is that no one has any monopoly of truth. The real test of truth is practice. If you think you have a better version, come and test it. Prove to the people that it worked. And in China, I think the system of socialism with Chinese characteristics is really all-embracive. Whatever works, whatever which can produce better results for the Chinese people can be incorporated in this Chinese version of socialism with Chinese characteristics. And the ultimate test is whether you can bring more butter and bread for the people. So I think how to improve the living standards of the people, how to make the people happier, how to make the environment better and clean, for example, that's the real test for China. So China is moving forward every day,
So you're
trying
saying
experiments.
ideology is not that important, but rather materialistic achievement and pragmatic achievements, that's more important. Is that what you're trying to say,
No,
Dr. Gao?
I think in 1978, Deng Xiaoping came up with this emancipating view. Whether an ideology, for example, socialism is good or not, you need to test it. You need to experiment with it. And the ultimate test is whether that system or ideology worked for the benefit of the people. So in this spirit, I don't think the ideology is carved in stone. The ideology becomes an evolving process,
Right.
and it needs to be adapted to the changing circumstances and challenges. And the real test is always serving the people, improving the living standards of the people, make people happier.
Well, whether it's black cat or a white cat, as long as it catches the mouse, it's a good cat. That has been a very interesting saying coming from Mr. Deng Xiaoping, and many have been using it as a joke, but actually they also respect the way this saying come into being. Dr. Adolf, therefore I go to you. This pragmatism in Chinese politics, how much do you see that's also true in China's political party politics and history?
Yeah, I guess the party now is trying to combine the two aspects, this pragmatism and the ideological background and the basics. I read with great interest, and I'm always interested in to find out when I read the speeches of the Chinese leaders, what they say about Marxism and what they say about the necessity to study and to develop Marxist thinking. And I think that is really a success to combine this thinking and to bring together the thoughts of Mao Zedong and the pragmatism and the theories of Deng Xiaoping, and to bring it together with today's new approaches to socialism with Chinese characteristics. Because this the thinking based on Marxist studies guarantees a continuity in building an ideological structure to create a foundation for pragmatic action today in national questions as well as in international relations. And this is something which is really what Mr. Gao said in the beginning, a unique development. We have nothing which can directly be compared with this development, and indeed, and really, this is something we from outside should see with a great interest and with a great willingness to learn from it, to learn about it, and to learn from it.
Dr. Gao, we have seen throughout history, the Chinese Communist Party, within the party itself, has its democracy, and also has been, over the years, be able to, in retrospect, correct its mistakes and move on based on its lessons and experiences. How strong do you see this sense of nature is still with the Chinese Communist Party, and what does it mean for China's political party system?
Well, I think if we bring a decency of the mind to look at the track record of China ever since 1978, we would have enough conviction to say that China has made mostly correct decisions in its economic development, transforming the country, etc. Now, the fact that China has made almost all the major decisions in the right way must be made in the process, and that process is what we call collective decision making. That is, in the early part of the decision-making process, everyone, every unit, every province, every different leaders, for example, have their own input into the system. It's very democratic. You can argue with each other, you can criticize each other, you can make counter proposals. But once a decision is made, it's fine, it's centralized, and everyone needs to give away their own different views and move in the same direction. That will create greater efficiency in the execution, and eventually the whole country, the whole nation benefit from that. So I think this collective decision-making process is again very unique in China, and I would sometimes chuckle when some Western countries criticize China or accuse China of not being democratic, of being a dictatorship or authoritarian, for example. No, they are barking at the wrong tree. How can a dictatorial decision-making process have generated so many great decisions transforming China from a backward country into the second largest economy in the world? I think they missed the major point of the sound and correct decision-making process embedded in the socialism with Chinese characteristics.